Hello, before we get started, I wanted to do a quick PSA here if you live in the United States of America to please vote. Election day is Tuesday, November 5th. As of recording this, you have 2 days to get out and do early voting, depending on the state that you live in. I will be casting my vote for Vice President Kamala Harris on November 5th in the state of New York. Demographically, I'm sure a lot of you are doing something similar to what I'm doing, but if for whatever reason you are listening to this and you were on the fence and you were planning on sitting out this election, you live in a state where you think your vote doesn't matter, please take this as a sign to get educated about the ballot initiatives and issues and races in your state and vote accordingly. And if you're unsure how to get started or where your polling place is, there are resources in the description for you down below that breaks it down by state. Thanks. Now listen, I try not to compare myself directly to the lives of others because envy is a sin. However, if there is one group of people that I am supremely jealous of in this life, it's that movie theater audience in Chicago that got to experience the SpongeBob movie in a 35mm print. Now, obviously, this is really silly, but this is a screening that the Chicago Music Box Theater held a couple of weeks ago. There were a bunch of clips going viral of it on TikTok, and it's just an example of, like, a positive, nostalgic moment shared by a bunch of people through a theater-going experience. Not to mention that this showing had sort of an emotional element as well, as the SpongeBob movie is considered by many to be the magnum opus of the work of Steven Hillenburg, the creator of the SpongeBob franchise who tragically passed away in 2018. And to see all of these people, who are presumably mostly full-grown adults, who have been personally affected in a positive way by Hillenburg's work, standing and applauding this movie in a way that he would have loved, it's nice, you know? My point here is that nostalgia marketing and these throwback children's media-centric events do not have an inherent evil to them, you know what I mean? Like, this is an example of how it can provide moments of joy. So as we all know, nostalgia-centric content and marketing can be a double-edged sword because in some cases you have situations like this where the entire purpose is like getting together to celebrate an already produced work and the legacy of its creator, which is all well and good and can be a very joyous occasion for some people who want to, like, you know, relive the past in a fun and interesting way with others. However, then there's like the, you know, more sterile kind of like marketing exec side of things where, you know, these big streamers and studios are taking these properties that were popular when we were kids and reviving them or rebooting them without really much reason or much to say. 4, 3, 2.
The cast of iCarly is back together and dishing new secrets to ET about the upcoming Paramount Plus revival series.
It's official, Zoe 101 is turning into Zoe 102. It's coming to Paramount Plus. Jamie Lynn Spears will return as Zoe Brooks for the movie adaptation of the hit Nickelodeon TV series.
Wizards of Waverly Place fans are finally getting what they've waited almost 12 years for. E! News can confirm that the hit Disney Channel show is getting a spin-off.
It is kind of weird living in a time where every show that was popular when I was a kid is now getting some kind of reboot, revival, or spinoff. And most of the time, I feel like these nostalgia series generate a little bit of buzz when they're first announced and then maybe for like the first episode, but they never end up picking up a dedicated fan base in the way that any of the original series did. In fact, a lot of them end up getting canceled after like 1 or 2 seasons. I think this is partially because a lot of these shows don't have much to say beyond the prospect of like, wow, you know that thing that never happened on the show while it was airing that you really wanted to happen when you were like 13? Well, we're gonna do it now that the actors are all adults. I've talked about this before, but back in like 2014, there used to be an entire economy of tweet cycles that were dedicated to this kind of nostalgia fanfare. Like, wow, I wonder what is in the Zoe 101 time capsule on the PCA campus. Or like, did you ship Freddie and Carly or Sam and Freddie? And I think the streaming bubble has made some of these ideas viable to investors because at one point there was interest in them them, and again, they have that built-in fan base from when the series originally was produced. But at the same time, there's so much content to consume and watch now that people who were at one point interested in these nostalgia fanfare ideas and seeing them get brought to life on screen kinda don't care anymore. Not to mention that like so much has come out about how a lot of these child actors were treated on the sets of their shows that the overall genre has like lost its appeal. Because even if we look back on a lot of these shows fondly, the memory is somewhat tainted by the fact that there's proven rampant abuse that was going on within these systems, leading to a lot of trauma for the actors involved. And despite a lot of these negative associations, you know, there are some actors who had positive experiences on these shows, and I'm not trying to take that away from them, but there has sort of been like a secondary content market that has been created for actors and behind the scenes production people who want to talk about these experiences on these sets and in these scenes in sort of like a looking back nostalgia type way. And one of the most controversial pieces of media to come through in this format in the last couple of years has been the cast of Ned's Declassified, who came back to do a podcast where they talk about their experiences on the show.
You remember, no matter what the activity was, how sweaty everybody would come back from lunch?
Oh,
Sweaty.
yeah.
Every lunch, us kids would eat in 12 seconds so that we could play for that half hour. We would come back into the hair and makeup room, like, to start back after lunch. All of us just sweat. They had to start from scratch.
Yeah.
Sweat, wet hair.
Wet.
Like,
I just remember KJ using the cool blow dryer on you always.
exactly.
Bruh.
Like, had to dry us off. Until we started dating, and then they had to fix our mouths.
Ah, bang, 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 bang.
Dude, I ran through every Ned's cast member before I landed on Devin.
Damn.
Remember that?
The chosen one.
Like telling Theo that I liked him, and we like held hands at the movies.
He's so mysterious. How
And
could you not?
Rob.
Yep.
And then Dev was
Rob's
like,
funny.
hey. And I was like, fuck you guys.
Yeah, it reached that point where you were liked by all the boys.
Meaning she had breasts.
Okay, so a couple of years ago, the trio who starred in the Nickelodeon show Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide started a podcast called Ned's Declassified Podcast Survival Guide. In many episodes of this podcast, the trio, Devin Werkheiser, Lindsay Shaw, and Daniel Curtis Lee, talk about the experiences they had while working on the show. Now, believe it or not, I feel like they came into this podcast with a lot of goodwill for a couple of reasons. One, because, like I said, there was a phenomenon like a decade or so ago where people were more intrigued with the prospect of rebooting these nostalgic properties. So you got a lot of, oh, they should reboot Ned's Declassified to do an adult survival guide. I would totally watch that. And two, because Ned's Declassified was created by Scott Fellows, and it was not created by or produced by Dan Schneider, who we all know is, you know, the most controversial figure who was a prominent part of the Nickelodeon pantheon at that time. So at the start of this podcast, a lot of people were like, oh, I'm really interested in hearing from, you know, the Ned's Declassified kids because they have more of a perspective on what it's like to grow up in a quote-unquote healthier environment for child actors, while meanwhile, it was a war zone over on the lots of Victorious and iCarly. And then, in kind of a fucked up way, a lot of that goodwill became squandered because it was clear that while these three didn't, you know, suffer under the abuse of Dan Schneider, they were at the very least experiencing certain milestones of teenhood and growing up in a working production environment. And the three of them have been very open about the fact that certain things were going on those sets, and not just open, but communicating it in like a vulgar way, a way that has made some people uncomfortable.
Do you remember?
What are you gonna ask on this podcast? What are you gonna ask on this public podcast, Lindsay?
Do you remember that?
The first what?
BJ.
I actually do. You really want to talk about this on the pod?
I just wanted to say that I felt like a failure from that point because
He didn't finish.
I know. Yep.
No.
You didn't. You didn't. After a moment, he just said, "Thanks, okay," and you got up and you went to the bathroom and you did your thing.
No. I don't remember that at all.
Which one do you remember? The one on the couch?
No, I remember the one in the backseat of your car. See, we can't talk about this on the pod.
Oh,
Dude,
yeah,
I can't believe...
We got busy in quite a few places. I don't want to say.
I can't believe...
Listen, I'm not a prude or anything. I don't think that, like, conversations surrounding sex should be as taboo in American culture as they currently are. However, whether this is fair or not, a lot of people who are listening to this podcast still can't shake the association that these actors have to this show that they were on when they were children and that we were watching when we were children. It's just weird to think about. And this kind of all came to a head a few days ago when one of these podcast hosts, Lindsay Shaw, who played Moze on Ned's Declassified, made this TikTok.
I just don't understand how Spider-Man can be remade 437,896 times and Ned's Declassified can't even get reboot once. Not even reboot once for a crappy TV movie. Just let us have a crappy TV movie.
Sorry I had to play that like sped up TikTok reaction. I guess the original video that Lindsay Shaw posted has since been taken down. It looks like a lot of her comments are turned off. But a lot of people interpreted this video to be some form of entitled, bizarre, cringe, sad, or all four of those. And I don't want to comment on like her demeanor and the way that she sounds because I know she's had like a past history of drug use and I don't want to like speculate on her current condition or whatever. That just seems like unnecessarily mean. But obviously this argument in and of itself is a bit flawed here because Spider-Man is a massively popular comic book character who has been around for generations, and comic book characters often lend themselves to be quote-unquote rebooted because comic book canon is a bit of a complex thing. It's a nonsensical comparison to start out with. And second of all, a lot of people have been pointing out the fact that there are a lot of factors that go into whether or not a series will get rebooted or picked up for a revival or what have you. Of course, a lot of that has to do with, you know, how popular the original source material was. And I think Ned's Declassified was relatively popular, but you know, it was no iCarly. Additionally, a lot of these reboots of Nickelodeon properties in particular have not been very successful or well reviewed, meaning that Paramount or whichever streamer is more likely to probably stay away from them. And third of all, big streaming services probably want to stay away from a property like Ned's Declassified, which by chance is now associated with your recap podcast in which you discuss getting ran through by your fellow cast members. I think what Lindsay fails to understand here is that nowadays there's always going to be this sort of inherent tension, right, between like, you know, the positives of nostalgia-centric content and how it makes people feel versus like, you know, the way that we've all become jaded within the context of the real adult world. When I was growing up, it felt like a lot of these shows sort of existed in a disconnected vacuum. You know, you didn't hear about any of the bad stuff. You just saw that like everyone was having the most fun time in the world on set and there were no problems and nothing could go wrong. And then all of a sudden, you know, these documentaries are coming out saying that all these kids that you grew up watching experienced some really horrible stuff, you know, during their time in production. And I think that a lot of these big media companies are realizing that that's the more prevalent association now. Instead of like all of the joyous kind of fun feelings you get from like, you know, visiting a property from your childhood, you're now met with like associations of things that you don't really want to think about when you're sitting back and relaxing and watching TV. I feel like a similar example of this tension actually played out recently during a press tour for the Wizards of Waverly Place spinoff.
Got it. And finally, choose a reoccurring character who should guest star on Wizards Beyond Waverly Place.
Silence.
I can't believe you guys put one of these people on here.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Millennials understand that. Okay, so Juliet Van Heusen, Mason Grayback, Zeke Beakerman, Steve Nichols.
Okay, so Dan Benson, the actor who played Zeke Beakerman on the original Wizards of Waverly Place, now has an OnlyPans. And that is what David Henrie, who plays Justin, is referring to in this clip. Now, obviously, yeah, this is a question of, like, why did the producers of this particular segment include this character in this list? I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt that, like, maybe they didn't know that, but also a lot of people were quick to point out the fact that David Henrie is, like, making a bigger deal of it in front of young children who otherwise might be a bit more innocent to that sort of thing. Other people have defended David Henrie during this interaction, saying that, like, he's just making the point that an adult sex worker should not be associated in any way with a show aimed at children and families. I think a lot of the debate surrounding this moment has weirdly come down to how people feel about his politics. A lot of people have also been criticizing David Henrie online because I didn't know this. Apparently he's like a very devout and traditional Catholic. Some people have said that he is pro-life. I don't think he has expressed support for a specific political candidate from what I understand. Not that this indicates anything about his politics necessarily, but he was also in that really fucking shitty Ronald Reagan biopic. But the argument here is like, is David Henrie actually being the weirdo by bringing this up in front of the kids on the cast? And moreover, the argument here from some people is like, why is he going out of his way to judge and look down upon this sex worker, as if coming back to star in a blatant cash grab version of a popular show that you were on a decade ago is objectively a more noble profession. My point here being that so long as these nostalgia reboots keep getting made, the more difficult it will be to produce them in this sort of sterile vacuum. No matter what, when child actors grow up, they have free will to, you know, go on whatever path they choose. Some of them will choose to talk about their sexual escapades on a podcast. Some of them will become OnlyFans creators. Some of them will portray young Ronald Reagan. But it's a wild world out there where everybody's record is publicly available on the internet, and that's becoming more difficult for these streaming companies who previously were interested in mining the nostalgia of these fan bases to contend with. I think we're coming to a turning point where 90s and 2000s nostalgia-inspired revivals are no longer the theoretical money printing machine that they used to be. Maybe we should focus on, like, making and funding new stuff. Anyone? Anyone want to make and fund some new stuff? Oh no, Freaky Friday 2? Okay, cool, got it, yeah. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. I'm going to be taking a break for a couple days, given the state of the rapidly approaching US election. So as I said in the beginning of this video, go vote, take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.